What are you willing to sacrifice for your brothers and sisters in the Lord? The church, God's treasured possession, next on So What?
Hi, I'm Don Waite.
And I'm Chris Dorman.
And welcome back to So What? Chris, the last few months we've been looking at the church as a family. You know, we looked at this promise that God gave to Abraham of a people. And then we looked at Jesus himself and what he said as this radical who turned the tables over on our understanding of what family is. In fact, he established a new family that we now call the church. Beyond that, his disciple, John, and then we see the Apostle Paul, all talking about this church as a family. We see it bore out in Acts, chapter 2, chapter 4, and throughout the whole New Testament. It really made sense for us, after we looked at that, to really look and see what did the early church do beyond the apostolic age. Were there men that picked up the baton and carried that theme along? Did they love each other in that same sacrificial way that Paul called us to, that Jesus himself called us to? And the answer, of course, was yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Pervasive throughout the Roman Empire. We see that as Christianity grew, that this loving of one another sacrificially and this idea of family continued to persist.
Right.
So we thought we'd unpack a few instances of this that we've read about.
And there's so many we could talk about. It was so challenging, so uplifting, really, to read these stories of our brothers and sisters, the very first Christians, and how they lived their lives and how they lived out the New Testament. There was a guy by the name of Clement, and he was the 4th bishop of Rome. And in 95 AD, he wrote a letter called First Clement. And he wrote it to the Church of Corinth because, surprise, they were having problems and they needed some help. Well, he wrote a lot of things in that letter about their brotherly love, about their compassion and their commitment to one another. But he said something that really struck me, and Don as well. He commended some of them who had sold themselves into slavery in order to buy out of slavery other Christians. He commended other Christians who had sold themselves into slavery and taken the proceeds from the sale of themselves, and given it to their brothers and sisters who couldn't buy food. And was obviously really challenged by that. Am I willing to sacrifice for my brothers and sisters in that way? Beloved, are you prepared to sacrifice for your brothers and sisters that way? But you know what? There's a lot more. There's a lot more, Don, right?
Yeah, there's this guy named Lucian in the 2nd century again, and he was a well-traveled unbeliever, hated Christians passionately. Okay? We have a map up right now showing you exactly where he lived all around the empire. So his exposure to how believers lived was throughout the empire.
Right.
Okay? And this man had not very kind things to say about him. He thought they were idiots, really, frankly.
He called us stupid. Said we were simple-minded.
Here's a little something that he wrote about Christians. The poor wretches have convinced themselves first and foremost that they are going to be immortal and live for all time, in consequence of which they despise death and even willingly give themselves into custody, most of them. Furthermore, their lawgiver persuaded them that they are all brothers of one another after they have transgressed once for all by denying Greek gods and worshiping the crucified sophist himself and living under his laws. Therefore, they despise all things indiscriminately and consider them common property.
So in other words, this guy who hated Christians was criticizing them because they loved one another as brothers and sisters. That they didn't care about their stuff, that they willingly shared it with others. Nobody considered their stuff their own. Sound pretty biblical?
Yeah.
Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 4, that they were prepared to give their lives for one another, and they were prepared to die in allegiance to the crucified one, Jesus Christ. That was the reputation of the church in that day. What is the reputation of the church today?
Right. What is my reputation as a believer? What is your reputation as a believer in your church or in your community? This really does convict your heart, doesn't it?
Totally. But there's more. Like I said, there's many stories we could tell, but we just picked a couple because these podcasts can't be 30 minutes. You guys would all just stop watching.
Right.
There's a guy by the name of Vettius Pagathus who lived in Lyon, France in 177 AD. And there was a persecution that broke out against the church. Now, that was not a community that loved Christians to begin with. They sort of lived under house arrest all the time. People could break into your home at any time, steal your stuff, put you in front of a mock trial, and then off to the lions you would go. Terrible place to be a Christian. Well, during this persecution, They would have, like I said, they'd have these mock trials. They'd bring these witnesses who'd come forward to testify about the cruel acts that Christians committed against little children. They would condemn them for their immorality, their bestiality, just terrible lies about Christians. Well, while all this stuff was going on during this trial, there was a man by the name of Vettius Epagathus, who was very wealthy. And in that day, in that culture, the criminal justice system was skewed way against the poor. If you had money, if you had social status, you could just bribe your way out of trouble. Well, Vettius was a Christian, and he was listening to his brothers and sisters be lied about and defamed, and he couldn't stand it. So he did the unthinkable. He stood up and asked for permission to testify to the good character of those who were being lied about. Well, that wasn't permitted. The accused, they didn't have the right to call witnesses. So they said, "Hold it, Vettius, are you saying that you're a Christian?" He said, "Yes." They said, "Well, then off to the executioner you shall go." And he was killed. He knew that there was nothing he could say or do that would save their lives. He knew by the very act of standing up in solidarity for his brothers and sisters, it would cost him his life. But he felt compelled to do it because people that he loved, people that he cherished, his brothers and sisters, were being lied about, and he couldn't stand it, because that's what family does. Do you have those kinds of relationships in your church?
It really is a so what, isn't it, Chris? I mean, when you look at this is what Christianity looks like. This is spirit-wrought, grace-wrought Christianity, where we are out there putting it all on the line for one another. And you know what? Look, nobody's perfect with this, but this is something that we strive for, not because it's the right thing to do, but because we have a heart for it, right? So one of the things you got to ask yourself, it is the right thing to do, sure, but do you have a heart for it, right? This isn't a list of do's and don'ts, a list of rules that I'm following. I got to do this and this and this for this guy over here because I love him. I do it because I love Jesus and because I love my brother and my sister. I am going to give of myself sacrificially for them.
Willingly, gladly.
Right.
Beloved, our world is a very troubled place. It's a desperate place, full of suffering, pain. And for many, they think the answer is politics. Right. And you know what? The problems that we face are not political. Mm-hmm. The problems that we face are spiritual. Therefore, the answers are spiritual. The world's problem is sin, and the answer to sin is Jesus Christ. Jesus said, "The world will know you are my disciples by your love for one another." In the early church, they kept killing Christians. Okay? Tertullian said that the Christian's blood is like water. And it doesn't matter what you do, the more you kill us, the more we bleed, the more we spread. And as Christians were more aggressively persecuted and being killed, the love that they had, the transforming love that they demonstrated to everyone around them attracted the unbeliever. They wanted that, even if it cost them their lives. The only hope for humanity is Jesus Christ. And if you truly care about this world, then love your brothers and sisters.
That's the power of the gospel, Chris. That is the power of the gospel.
Thank you for tuning in, my friends. And I'll talk to you next week.
See you soon.